Alright, here we are, the patch notes for the Shadows of Change expansion update, patch 4.2.0. Curious to see what's going on in here. I'll be looking over it, talking about it, and if there's nothing interesting, I just won't upload this recording. But ideally, there will be something interesting. And if you're seeing this video on YouTube, that means there was something interesting. So, I'll go ahead and move on to hit it. We have got through all of the content show-offs there. I was very happy with Cathay. Very happy with Tzeentch. Kislev, I was less happy with. When I first saw that Frostworm, I was aghast. I could not believe it. And not in a good way. Not a good aghast. I started to try and make myself more fond of it. And you can observe me trying to go through that process in the video. Trying to go like, well, it doesn't fly. It's not really a dragon. So if it's just a big ice lizard, I guess I can accept it. But I'm going to be honest. The more I've sat on it, the more I do not like that thing. So, nonetheless, it's going to be added to the game, and there's nothing I can do to take that back. But everything else I've seen has been cool. So, hey. Well, I don't like the Kislev Halberdiers either. I like getting a Kislev Peasant unit for some degree of thematicness, but I still think that it screws with Kislev's army. Army balance, or not army balance. Army identity. There we go. Too much. But anyways, okay, yes, so all this going on, this is a recap. So the changes: new units, heroes, and spells. Tweaks to excessive bloom. My god, we have needed that for 2 years. I can finally uninstall the mod to undo the bloom, so that's cool. Tech tree rebalance for Cathay. Cathay's tech tree was already pretty good. Changes to Rampage. Tweaks and fixes. Okay. So, let's see here. So, yeah, new units, Chaos Lord of Tzeentch. Now we can actually see them in gameplay. Okay. So, looking at this guy in gameplay, yeah, he's very cool. I like him. Wouldn't expect anything to be new in the descriptions here. But I could be wrong. The Exalted Hero of Tzeentch still looks awesome. Still very happy with the liberties they took with him. They did a very good job of simultaneously, the Chaos Lord of Tzeentch is a very good send up to a popular art piece of what a Warriors of Tzeentch army would look like. It's a very good love letter to people that are fans of that art, which I like that art piece a lot. While the Exalted Hero of Tzeentch does a very good job of being a very new design for Tzeentch. I like them both a lot. Centaur's of Tzeentch, solid choice. Gonna be curious to see, no doubt, what other marked beastmen we're gonna get in the future. I certainly hope it leads to more marked beastmen. I like the Beastmen, and I don't like the old lore that Games Workshop put out. The Chaos Gods never mark any of them. I much prefer for them to be able to seek the glory of the Dark Gods the same way humans can. And yeah, it looks like they've added more on. I could swear they didn't have that body paint before. I did think before, during the Tzeentch blog, hang on, I can pull open the Tzeentch blog. There we go. So, did they have that body paint the whole time? They did. I just didn't notice it. Okay. So I somehow just glanced over that. That is big. Because when I looked at this unit, previously discussing the Tzeentch blog, I did say that I thought it was a little bit underwhelming that the only real visual differences were, or maybe I didn't explicitly say it, but I was certainly thinking it. A little bit underwhelming that the only explicit visual differences were Tzeentchian axes and Tzeentchian loincloths, which does it count as a loincloth if it's on the front half of the horse part? Whatever. But the body paint actually does add a lot to make them look unique, so I like that. Change bringers, yep. Nothing too surprising here. I could see Satang shoots a massive bolt into some poor Tzeentch marauders, poor guys. No gameplay pictures of the Gate Master, that's curious. Okay, so yeah, we don't get to see gameplay pictures of the units that we didn't already get to see gameplay pictures of. It's a little bit strange, considering that the stuff's going to come out tomorrow. It's not like they're not ready yet. Though this is an oddly derpy photo of the Kislevite warrior. Not sure why they had the PC that was running low graphics settings take that picture, but okay. Ice Court Sled, there we go. We get to see that in gameplay, and it looks quite good. I like it. So there we go. Bloom tweaks. Oh, thank God. That is a massive improvement. Like on Tyrion, you can see solid improvement. Phoenix Guard, it's been toned down, but not so much that it ain't still there. But the Silverin Guard, good lord, look at that difference. That is like, yeah, that is crazy. That is, yeah, that is saving me a mod slot for those times where you have to worry about hitting the hypothetical mod cap. Which, did they ever fix that bug? I don't know. It was something like 160 or 170 at one point, which I thought was a little absurd. I was never going to hit 100. Like, I consider myself a Total War mod fiend, and I've never come close. Whenever I get above 100, I think that I'm going crazy. And I never end up with stable saves from day to day either, because naturally, 100 mods, one of those mods is going to be updating for pretty frequently. Several of those mods, actually. Any given day, you're going to get a mod update, which is going to invalidate your saves a lot of the time. Whatever. Oh, wow. They changed the corruption borders. That's a pleasant surprise. I know that was always a big, big complaint that a lot of people had, but I honestly, on some level, I was just fine with it. I accepted it as a issue of the medium. Things are never perfect in video games. I kind of wondered if it was fixable. But I assume, for it to have taken this long, and people to have complained about it for this long, I have to assume that's probably a fairly difficult fix. I do like that it almost looks like a painting, a watercolor painting, with the borders. But yeah, that's really cool. That's very nice. All very good stuff here. A big shout out to the modders. Yeah, you gotta put a shout out to the modders in. They're good guys. Well, maybe they could be awful people in real life, but they make cool mods. There you go. That's the phrase I'm gonna go with. And a shout out to all the mods that got effectively invalidated by this update. That's very cool of them. Okay, stability and performance. Wouldn't expect anything to be here. I haven't noticed any stability or performance issues myself, unless there's anything that's just going to say increased, made graphics less intensive. Okay, and here we go. Some gameplay changes. These I can speak to a bit more. No more trade buffs from landmarks for factions that can't trade at all, so there you go, greenskins, I suppose. I wonder, Beastmen can still trade, right? They can't produce trade resources, but they can still make trade agreements, right? I forget. Actually, I haven't played Beastmen in Warhammer 3. They were my last campaign I finished in Warhammer 2, so I haven't touched them since. I should play them sometime. Especially since you can now make, now trade agreements aren't reliant on either sharing a border or having a port. Since now you can just make trade agreements with anyone, anywhere, any place, anytime. That's quite nice, because it used to be with the Beastmen that you could have more trade agreements if you made sure your first herdstone would always be your capital. So it was, if you took a port, a coastal settlement, as your first herdstone, that would count as having a port capital, and you could make trade agreements with anyone in the world who owns a port as the Beastmen. I always thought that was funny, because it's the Beastmen. They're not exactly civil engineers or anything like that. They're not known for having a strong domestic economy. Yeah, a lot of just little bugs. Fixed handful of effects across the campaign that did not specify they actually applied faction-wide. So that's really good. That's an issue that a good couple things have had. Obviously, these buildings and apparently Leonkur's skill. I've seen that issue pop up in mods a good couple times. That always can be an issue when it's ambiguity of like, okay, this tech just says, or this building just says, leadership +3. For who? I would like to know for who. So it's nice to see that. And other than that, lots of just small changes to construction costs, it looks like. We can now change the campaign border rendering into several modes. Ownership and province. Okay, ownership and region. Okay, we can now set border lines for region. I like that, because there are still a few buildings in the game that only buff the region and not the province. And I've wanted to know about those, because the region borders, you can only see the borders of a region if somebody else owns the other region, and you can see the national borders between the two of you. But that's a nice change for that. Very cool. Spacebar options menu has been slightly reworked to be more consistent. I assume they mean they just moved a few of the options. Minor factions could not build siege equipment. AI Mother Ostankya will now stockpile no more than 10 incantations at a time. Chaos Dwarf exploit could make it where buildings were free. Okay, yeah, there we go. Okay, here we go. Rampage rework. Here we go. Here's something to sink our teeth into. This looks like a lot. Okay, completely rework the way Rampage attribute functions. This is going to be a big change for a lot of units, I assume. Rampage has always been one of those attributes that's a little nebulous in the way it works. Yeah, it's just like, if you get hit, you might Rampage. You don't know when. And if you Rampage, you'll just attack the nearest unit. I believe that's the logic I was working off of. I guess now we're going to know better. So, Rampage used to work by tracking 2 HP thresholds, 75% and 40%. When a unit hit 75% HP remaining, it would be issued a Rampage token, which the unit would spend when it next took damage. If the Rampage token was spent, the unit entered the Rampage state for 40 seconds. The same thing would happen when the 40% HP threshold was crossed. I did not know that. Okay. Well, it's a good thing I know that now. That's not the system that's going to be used. So, they need to have the Rampage attribute, have a valid visible enemy within 150 meters, take a hit, have a Rampage token remaining, not be routing, not be netted. Okay. So, now it is just simply... Okay, it's called Feral Rage. Okay, unit with Rampage will be uncontrollable and attack the nearest enemy unit. Rampage, when there are no enemies around, Rampaging units will just move at random. In one direction, or will they move, like, in patterns? I'd assume just in one direction, in which case you'd end up with Rampaging units just running off into the night. That is an interesting question, though, because I believe before, if you're playing, say, the Greenskins and you had a Squig Herd, the Squig Herd has Rampage. But if the Squig Herd got hit by, let's say, a boulder from a Dwarf Grudge Thrower, and that took that Squig unit down to below 75% health, and you were on the other side of the field, the Squig unit wouldn't Rampage. It wouldn't like getting hit with a boulder, certainly. Who would? Except maybe Slaanesh. But they wouldn't Rampage, and now they will. So units that would have Rampage when they get hit by that boulder are then going to just run off in another direction. It's a curious change. Okay, with these changes, it's a lot clearer what the attribute actually does. The random movement exhibited by Rampaging units is a new behavior. Units used to just stand still in Rampaging state. Okay? So that this is a deliberate change so that you can disrupt formations from a distance. Particularly good for Slaanesh. Makes sense. Was there not a Lore of the Wild spell that applied Rampage? I don't remember. How many ranged tools are there to force Rampage onto somebody else? Because Witch Elves can, of course, put Rampage on people by going up and hitting them. I feel like there's another Lord or Hero that could do that. Guess I'll look into that afterwards. This is gonna be nice for Rampage users. It's gonna be a bigger question if you have units in your army with Rampage, because that'll make them now a target for artillery to make them run off into the night. But yeah, this is an interesting change. Units won't inherently have Rampage anymore. And there are now 2 new abilities in a more deterministic and player-facing way. Random chance is no longer a factor. So it is now, they will Rampage twice. Once when they hit 75% health, once when they hit 25% health. Okay. There's a good couple of units with Rampage that this won't affect, I believe. Norscan Berserkers, for instance, will only Rampage once they've already been in combat for a while. So you don't have to worry about Norscan Berserkers getting hit by a boulder and deciding to go run off into the hills for some reason. But this is gonna be curious. Then, yeah, this is gonna be curious to deal with. Then, I'd like to see how this will work out. Okay. And it will always happen. Lizardmen, the cold-blooded ability is still going to be there, so you can turn Rampage off if you're playing Lizardmen. Not really as relevant for Lizardmen now. Warhammer 2, some people may not remember this, but Warhammer 2 at launch, virtually every Lizardman unit except the Skinks and the Slan had Rampage, including the Sauruses. I don't think Temple Guard had it, but Sauruses, Kroxigors both had Rampage. They do not now. Rampage got replaced with Reptilian Instincts or something like that. Cold-blooded Instincts, something like that. That makes them fight a little bit better when they're damaged, which is kind of the opposite of what Rampage would do. And that's a big part of why Lizardmen got cold-blooded, was so that they could have a Lord make it where one unit of Saurus infantry would not Rampage. But it was notorious for much of Warhammer 2's lifetime that made the Lizardmen kind of difficult to play unless you were overwhelmingly winning, or you're playing campaign and you don't have to really worry about losing that many units anyways. And that big change made Lizardmen become a very different faction, and of course now they're really different. The dinosaurs are the only units you need to worry about rampaging. So it's weird then that they still have the cold-blooded ability now that I think about it, because it's really just only to be used on their monsters. And there's other races that have rampaging monsters other than Lizardmen. Well. Alright. And they changed the threshold, from 40% to 25% to make more of a gap. Avoid situations where a unit just keeps rampaging for forever. And they'll be observing the change to keep an eye on it. And the units that have Feral Rage, Manticores, Dreadsaurians, Hydras, none of these, these are all units that had Rampage to begin with, I believe. Maybe not the Saber-Tusks. The Saber-Tusk I don't remember having Rampage, but I could be wrong. Did the Mammoth always have Rampage? I don't remember the Mammoth having Rampage. Well, anyways. So, they've conducted a review of all Rampage effects, so that's cool. Stealth Lizardmen update. I spit a little bit, that was nasty. And they've stealthily updated Lizardmen in battle slightly, thematic new abilities. And special shout out to Lore Master of Sotek, who's been campaigning for Spawnkin. Good on him. Okay, whoa! A change for Skinks and Kroxigors. Skinks and Kroxigors now have an ability called Spawnkin, like the Night Peasant connection in Bretonnia or the Yin Yang connection in Cathay. And the... What is it that the connection is called in the Chaos Dwarfs between slaves and the Chaos Dwarfs themselves? It's not hatred, but it's something similar. Resentment or something. But, so Skinks and Kroxigors are now connected. Skinks in the vicinity of Kroxigors now cause fear. That's a big change. That's a really cheap unit to get access to a game to cause fear. While Kroxigors get a buff to weapon strength. Not huge, but it'll make them do more damage in those fights they get into with other monsters. And it is a buff to skink infantry units, not to skink cavalry units. Not for the Ripperdactyls, nor for the Pterodons. Nonetheless, this is nice for the thematic armies I've already run in the past, of Skinks and Kroxigors together. I've already quite liked using skink skirmishers and cohorts to pull enemies near and then have the Kroxigors charge through them. So that's quite nice. And they will not be giving the ability to skink lords or heroes, because then it could get really crazy stupid real fast, especially since the skink lords and heroes can mount all kinds of crazy monsters. Predatory Fighter, a unit with this ability, gains a small portion of melee attack and speed whenever an enemy that they have recently fought is routing. So this is for Sauruses and for some of the and for Kroxigors, Cold One Riders, and a couple of the dinosaurs. And it'll make them better at running down routing units. That's definitely neat. Did the Lizardmen have a unit that was really good for running down routing units before? Not really. That's kind of the role you leave to Warhounds or light cavalry, and I guess the Lizardmen didn't really have. Pterodons could work, but that's a little bit overkill. You'd almost expect them to be better put to other jobs. But, like, comparatively, I think when I think of units that are good for chasing down routing units, of course, Warhounds or Fell Bats from the Vampire Counts, or Pistoliers from the Empire. This is going to be a little bit odd, then, that it is going to be Sauruses are going to be solid at the job now, and are going to want to run down a routing unit after they've routed. Except, of course, Skaven, since you can't catch a routing Skaven unless you're cavalry, but, you know. Temple Guard now cause fear and are immune to psychology when standing next to a lord or hero. Sacred Duty and Eternal Duty. Okay. Oh, no, excuse me. Eternal Duty for the Star Chamber Guardians Regiment or no. They instead are unbreakable. Very nice. But yeah, immune to psychology for Temple Guard. That's quite good. I see a lot of abilities that I see getting put to use by mods. And any Lizardman unit positioned near a solar engine will now regain vigor. Ooh! That's, any ability that focuses on damaging vigor or regaining vigor is discreetly really good and just always underappreciated. That is going to be a very nice change for the solar engine, which is already neat, because it's one of the, like, 2 artillery pieces Lizardmen get access to. But that's going to make it not just good at long range for bombarding the enemy, but excellent at short range for buffing the friendly units and making it so that they don't get debuffed by long battles. If you haven't got to see just how important vigor is to determining a unit's effectiveness, I strongly encourage to download Cataf Southern Realms mod. And also, you probably should download that anyways, because it's an excellent mod that fleshes out the Southern Realms and makes them not just Empire knockoffs. You know, going down to there and being greeted by some gentleman named Leonardo that nonetheless says, you know, for the glory of Sigmund and the Empire, or whatever. But when you get that mod, there's a unit available to the border princes of the New World colonies called Swashbucklers. Swashbucklers have a special ability. Whenever they are in melee with an enemy unit, they rapidly drain that enemy unit's vigor. And I have seen Swashbucklers wipe the floor with Chaos Warriors, even though Swashbucklers otherwise are just a hybrid infantry unit. But it is so powerful to make the Chaos Warriors exhausted that quickly that the Swashbucklers are capable of beating them. So, to have the solar engine there, making it where your Lizardmen units are not getting debuffed by getting exhausted, is very nice. There's another unit I can think of off the top of my head where it is a great example of the significance of the vigor system, which is the Centaurs, which, as long as their leadership is high, they cannot lose vigor. It's called drunkenness or something like that. And come to think of it, I believe the Sartosan pirates that Aranessa can recruit have the same ability. And for them, for the Centaurs especially, it is fantastic. Because cavalry gets much slower. The more exhausted it gets, especially, that is significant for skirmish cavalry. Centaurs with throwing axes will never get tired. They can outrun pretty well anyone in a long sprint. They won't outrun Warhounds, for instance, or a Flyer in the immediate run, but in the long run, they'll outrun them. There you go. Okay, elemental attribute. New attributes. Okay, elemental attribute works very much like existing demonic and undead attributes. They are unbreakable, but take damage. Well, excuse me, they cannot rout, but they take damage when their leadership is broken. They have fist resist, fear and terror immunity. The incarnate elemental beasts, the elemental bear, and the onyx croman are all elementals. Interesting, onyx croman won't rout. For elemental bears and incarnate elemental beasts, that's not too shocking. That makes sense for both of them. And neither of those units were you going to see rout very often anyways. But the Onyx Croman, that's curious, because Onyx Croman are cheap and not very tough. So, wonder if that'll make them a bit better of a meat shield. Well, probably just make them equivalent to fell bats, won't it? And fell bats yeah, they don't rout, of course, but they disintegrate very easily. So I imagine the Onyx Chromen are going to be in a similar category. Okay. Construct. This was already an attribute. Nonetheless, came with Tomb Kings. It prevents the unit from being routed. Damage is applied when leadership. Okay, they've just applied the construct to several units that did not have the construct attribute before. Satang, the Terracotta Sentinel. Was the Terracotta Sentinel wasn't already considered a construct? It's listed as a construct in the army list. Oh, whatever. Jade Lion, Jet Lion, those were listed as monsters before, which was a bit weird. And the Rogue Idol. The Rogue Idol's a surprise. The Rogue Idol... Well, didn't the Rogue Idol before have some kind of ability? I don't remember if the Rogue Idol was already unbreakable, but it already took damage at differing stages of health. Because I know the Rogue Idol already has the special ability where the more damage it takes, the more it drops rocks on nearby unfortunates. But, nonetheless, interesting. Glorious Charge comes from the Kislev Army book. Which one? The one that they have secretly in a vault for the old world, or the one from back in the Storm of Chaos? Anyways, unique trait of Winged Lancer and the Griffin Legion. When charging into an enemy unit, charge bonus duration is doubled, and the enemy unit takes a leadership penalty as if they have been attacked in the flank. Really? So they take the flanking debuff even if they're attacked from the front. That's pretty crazy. And Winged Lancers and Griffin Legion already cause fear, right? If memory serves, they do, because that's part of what makes them special. So so double duration of the charge bonus. Which means they want to stay in combat a little bit longer after charging in. They don't want to rapidly cycle charge like some other units, like most of Slaaneash's roster. They want to charge in, stay for a little bit, then pull out. Interesting. I'm glad to see Winged Lancer and Griffin Legion buffs. I like the Kislev army list identity of hybrid infantry and lots of cavalry. And I think that naturally people tend to just go down to what are the strongest units and ignore anything else. So people tend to go towards the Ice Guard or Tsar's Guard. Seeing cavalry buffs, I think, is really quite nice. And will hopefully encourage people to be a bit more creative with the way they play. They probably won't. They will continue to play in boring, cheap, easy ways. Well, I shouldn't say cheap, but boring, easy ways. Cheesy ways as well. But this is nice for the people like me who try to play thematically, and especially for me, with the new Drazina Lord, I want to build some thematic Kislevite armies of just Winged Lancers, Horse Archers, and the Drazina for old school countryside Kislev instead of the more modernized urban Kislev. Immune to flanking, no penalties from being flanked. Was that not already a thing for the Beast of Nurgle? Maybe it wasn't. Maybe I'm going crazy. Nonetheless, the Bastiladon is now immune to flanking. That makes sense, actually. I wonder, should there be more units that are immune to flanking? I'll think on that further. But nonetheless, that's interesting to play around with for tactics. The Bastiladon doesn't need a rear guard. Well, you never really worry that much about monsters being flanked to begin with, or at least I don't. Though this may show a discrete buff in that way. The Bastiladon, which is already a tanky monster, that's the idea of it. It doesn't do very much damage, but it's very tanky and can carry a variety of cool tools on the back. It will now be probably considerably tankier when fighting crowds of enemy units. I guess that's where flanking buffs kick in for monsters, really. Is when they're fighting infantry instead of fellow monsters. If they're fighting another monster, they won't be surrounded. But if they're fighting infantry, they will be. So this is going to make the Bastiladon even more of a dedicated tank against infantry mobs. Revealed. Units with this attribute are permanently visible to the enemy, regardless of line of sight. It negates Stalk, Hide in Forest, Unspottable. It is used offensively to reveal enemy units within an area. Okay, but what applies this? Is it a spell? Would it be... It'd be interesting if it's the Sky Lantern for Cafe, because that's a unit that's otherwise kind of awkward to use. That'd give it more viability. Units with a silenced attribute are unable to use abilities or spells. Again, we saw already that the Lore of Hags has a silencing spell. I wonder if they're going to go around and give some of the older units silencing abilities or spells, or if it's just going to be a thing for new units. Okay, in a previous release, made some changes to mount issues, which inadvertently caused all characters mounted using the War Beast 2.0 tech to be rescaled. Karl Franz is larger than life, but he should not be larger than Deathclaw. Fair enough. To be honest, I never noticed that. I'm sure somebody did and complained a lot on the Reddit, but I actually never noticed that. Which probably is because I don't play Karl Franz really at all. If there's any campaign I tend to go back to in Total War Warhammer, it's more likely to be Luwin or Tyrion or Vlad. Which I need to play all of those guys again soon. Anyways, fix the spotting range for number of units. Set too low. Added Chaos Dwarfs to some diplomacy techs. Yeah, just some general changes here. Nothing too crazy. And, oh yeah, they fixed the Moraliano showing the wrong number of construction slots thing. I noticed that. That was a little bit annoying. Okay. Beastmen, let's see. Nothing too crazy up here, but the Zongors have seen a slight nerf. They're a little bit cheaper. You get a bit more to the unit. Well, this isn't a nerf. This is definitely a change. Okay, so they're considered marked gores and not marked bestigors. Really? Well, I guess bestigors then aren't really particularly favored by the gods. The lore for the bestigors, if memory serves, is just that they're the favorite gores of whoever is the current Bray Shaman or whoever's just leading the Bray herd, I suppose. So, guess that makes sense. Bestigors aren't necessarily blessed by the gods, and as a matter of fact, the Chaos Gods might not like that they get such favorite treatment. Water's good. So, yeah. Okay, that's just, so it's really more of a flavor or thematic or lore change than it is a gameplay change, because these are some pretty significant changes, actually, because the entity changes, the price changes, very slight, but a considerable loss of melee attack in exchange for a considerable gain in melee defense. A loss of armor. Okay. Actually, at 650 cost, they're probably going to be cheaper than Bestigors, aren't they? Interesting. But the Zongors have gone from being a high-speed unit with barrier that buffs friendly wizards for the Beastmen. Okay, it's still going to have different purposes. It's okay. Because it was before that for both the Beastmen and the Tzeentch, and for Tzeentch, the Zongors would have shared the same purpose. But I guess if you cycle charge them, they're probably still going to be a pretty solid offensive unit. But 38 melee defense is really high for a Beastman unit. That is going to imply to me that for Tzeentch, you're probably still, if you're playing Tzeentch, you're still going to want to recruit, if I can put my words in the right order, going to want to recruit Zongors as a cycle charging infantry unit that uses the barrier to avoid taking damage and charges to build up magic, while when you're playing the Beastmen proper, a lot of your units already do that. Gores with dual weapons and Bestigors are both already excellent cycle charging infantry units. So for Zongors, you probably want, oh, I forget, the Zongor ability that causes them to increase the winds of magic, that comes from charging, doesn't it? Not just any general combat, but specifically from charging. Thought it did. Well, I guess for the Beastmen themselves, then, you're left with a choice. Because the Zongors are going to be one of the higher defensive units in the army. They are a bit lacking for armor compared to the Bestigors, as we can see. But they seem to be cheaper than Bestigors, and come with barrier. So it's going to be a choice of whether you want them to be a high-speed holding unit, or if you want to keep cycle charging them to generate more magic. I like that. I like being able to make choices with a unit. Okay, Incarnate Elemental Beast has seen some major changes. It is no longer unbreakable. That's a good thing. It is no longer an anti-large monster. It is now an anti-infantry monster. If you go back to when Shadows of Change first released, and I recorded a good couple sessions of a Let's Play with Ostankya. I had trouble with the Incarnate Elemental Beasts because I could not tell if it was supposed to be anti-large or anti-infantry. As it had a bonus versus large, and a rather meaty one at that. Didn't seem to actually do that well in fights against monsters, though. But its anti-infantry capabilities seemed much better, especially because it had the bound spell to it where it would cause the Murder of Crows to come down and start attacking people in its vicinity. It has lost Woodsman and Unbreakable and picked up Strider and Elemental. So yes, the Incarnate Elemental Beast is no longer bizarrely powerful just through being unbreakable. And it now ignores all terrains, not just the woods, so it'll just happily run up and down hills without any speed debuffs. It can run through marshes and swamps without any debuffs, so that's all very nice. Well, large units don't take debuffs from being in marsh or swampland or rivers, so I guess it's just the hills. Malagor will no longer forget that he has wings and climb ladders. That's never occurred to me to even try to put Malagor on a ladder, but that's funny. So, yeah, nothing else particularly big. Bretonia, I wouldn't expect anything big here. Nah. Green Knight got a slight buff. Yeah, nothing here. Chaos Dwarfs, yeah, it just fixes slight cost changes to Dark Elf Lords. Okay, the Witch Elves no longer have just any unit they attack takes Rampage. It is now an ability they have. Curious. They now just do regular poison, which regular poison is nothing to sneeze at. Regular poison is still excellent. How is that Witch Brew ability going to work? Guess I'll find out soon. Harganeth Executioners now have immune to psychology. Interesting to see they're handing out more immune to psychology to more elite units. Granted, it makes sense, especially since that immune to psychology is basically Total War Warhammer's replacement for what I think on the tabletop was called Stubborn. It's gonna raise some interesting questions if they go too crazy with it. Immune to psychology can be a really powerful ability if you put it on the wrong unit. Because immune to psychology can effectively be... Wait, did Harganeth Executioners already cause fear? Anyways. Immune to psychology making you immune to fear and terror. Fear is a debuff of 8 leadership. Terror not only has fear already built in, so it still provides the 8 leadership debuff just outright, but terror also has the ability, if memory serves, once you get below 13 leadership, or once you hit 13 leadership or lower, you automatically rout. Terror can only do that so many times, but nonetheless, when you combine that, because that ability inherently means that 13 leadership is equivalent to 0 leadership. It has moved the threshold of what makes you rout to a higher threshold. Which effectively means that when you combine that with the -8 leadership from fear, if a unit with terror is facing a unit that has neither fear nor terror nor immune to psychology, that would mean that the unit effectively is taking a leadership debuff of 21, which is a massive leadership debuff. Which is part of why, for instance, the Manticore can be so strong, even though it's not really statistically that impressive of a unit, just by flying up and then rear charging units over and over again. Because it is a flying monster, it's a cheap flying monster, it has terror, and rear charges provide way more of a leadership debuff than any other way of attacking. So a Manticore could very easily rout a lot of units by just rear charging. So it's going to be curious if they go too nuts with adding immune to psychology. Immune to psychology on the Harganeth Executioners or the Temple Guard, not that crazy. Those were units that already had really high leadership. But I hope they don't go too nuts in the future with it. Physical resistance changed the Ancestor Spirits. Oh, did the Ancestor Spirits accidentally get left out of the physical resistance changes? Because I thought 55% was supposed to be the across-the-board physical resistance amount for ethereal units. Yeah, did the Green Knight and the Ancestor Spirits somehow get left out? Huh. Well, either way, Cathay has seen a technology tree rebalance, bring it in line with the tech trees in Warhammer 3. Reach the same bar set by Chaos Dwarfs. Remove underwhelming or filler effects. They were nice to have, but not enough to pursue. And won't cover them all, but they'll just hit the big ones. Administrative subsidies, minus 5% upkeep for peasants, has been changed to minus 20% recruit cost for peasants. The original upkeep reduction was not noticeable enough. And yeah, I'm glad that they did not buff the upkeep reduction for peasants. Cathay has peasants are a little too strong for Cathay, which feels weird. They're like the only army in the game. Everyone else, the strongest units are generally the units that are at the high end of the tree. But peasants for Cathay are stupid strong, which is very funny in a lot of senses. Because the Cathay long peasant spearmen, yeah, the peasants, those are some pretty long peasants. The long spear peasants were specifically clarified as being long spearmen and not pikemen, specifically to draw the comparison to the mimetic long spear Ashigaru from Total War Shogun 2, which the Oda clan could recruit, which were themselves notorious for being absurdly strong in spite of how cheap they were. So it's kind of funny how it comes back around. Dragon Emperor's Blessing has lost the 5% upkeep and instead has a absolutely absurd Hero Lord recruit rank buff. Well, you're getting that tech fairly late in the game, so I guess that's fine, but good lord, that makes Lord and Hero leveling as Cathay a little bit absurd. Granted, I guess you could always, like, as, you know, let's say Bretonia, build a bunch of Grail chapels everywhere, Grail cathedrals everywhere, and get a similar Lord and Hero recruit rank buff. No, it was only for Lords, wasn't it? Heroes don't get that. Anyways, that's a massive increase. Plus 50% XP for characters on the Grace of Xin Yang. Is that the first ever tech that just increases XP for characters? Huh. And plus 5 speed bonus has been changed to a plus 20% speed bonus. For who? For everybody? That was for infantry units, right? Wasn't it? Good lord. Is that one of those texts where it's only for Yang armies and not for Yin? Because that's an interesting question. Because I always thought the tech tree providing different buffs to Yang armies and Yin armies was awesome and underappreciated. I would love to see those techs get crazier so Yang armies are very lightning fast and offensive. Not lightning fast, but much more offensive. Yin armies are much more defensive, or at least much sneakier. So I hope Interspeed is just for Yang armies. Even then, 20% speed buff is pretty big. That's... let's say Peasant Spearmen of 32 speed. 10% of 32 would be... we'll just guesstimate 3 speed. So they'd go from 32 to 35. So it'd be a buff of 6 speed if it's 20%. If my math is correct, which it almost certainly is not, it never is. But that would be 38 speed. 38 speed Peasant Spearmen, that's about as fast as the Skaven or Beastmen. Those are some fast peasants. Yuan Bo now begins his campaign with a Gate Master. That makes sense. That's the hero that's coming with his DLC. Yuan Bo has seen some changes. He is now less tough and more fighty. Interesting. Makes sense. They've got rid of Executioner. It now comes with his unique item, so that's not just part of his base kit. I imagine that is important. But yeah, making him a bit more offensive, a little bit less defensive. That makes sense. Miao Ying was already supposed to be the defensive legendary Lord Cathay got, who was supposed to be more of a tank and less of a killer. And I assume Zhao Ming is between the two. And who knows where Yin Yin and Li Dao will land. Yuan Bo's dragon form. Yeah, it's roughly similar stat changes. The Celestial General is now more expensive. I did notice it was odd that he was more expensive than the Lord Magistrate. Or cheaper than Lord Magistrate, excuse me. The Lord Magistrate, the buffs he grants are nice. Most people don't use them. So I always figured the Lord Magistrate was who you went through if you just wanted to have a cheap Cathayan Lord. So I thought it was odd then that the Celestial General was cheaper, Because for most people that want a melee lord, they're just going to take the Celestial General, or if they want a spellcaster, Buffy sort of lord, buffer sort of lord, not Buffy, not a Vampire Slayer. Look out, Vlad. That for people who wanted more of a caster or a buffer sort of lord, they would just instead spring for the... How have I forgotten their name? The Dragon-Blooded. I'll just call them the Dragon-Blooded. I remember that the name they have beyond Dragon-Blooded is something taken from Japanese, because that comes from the old Tamarcon book, where the old Tamarcon book confoundingly made Cathay simultaneously Chinese and Japanese at the same time. And luckily, Crave Assembly and Games Workshop, in making Cathay for Warhammer 3, did away with almost all of the Japanese loan stuff they put in Tamarcon. Better safe for Nippon, anyways, when a modder gets around to doing it. And instead just made it more purely Cathayan. And the one, like, leftover, holdover was the Dragon-Blooded, still are named. I forget what it's called. It doesn't matter. But the Celestial General, beyond price changes, now has a bit less health, more leadership, more armor, more weapon damage. Nice for him. Doesn't look like massive changes, but a little bit to make him a little bit beefier in melee. Not too shabby. Across the board, cost reductions for the Lord Magistrate. Good for him. Like I said, a lot of people tend not to pick the Lord Magistrate. Don't see people picking Lord Magistrate even if they make him dirt cheap. He's almost like mimetically bad. And once you get to, not mimetically bad, but mimetically underwhelming, mimetically lame. And once you get to that level, people tend to either just pick you for the meme or not pick you at all. The Onyx Chromen are now a yin unit and not a yang unit. Ooh, I like that. Because a big part of what I was really excited for the Jet Lion, because it added a yin unit that was melee. So that you could run a melee Cathayan army and not have to worry about the fact that you aren't using the Harmony system. Barely at all. But the Jet Lion is pretty expensive. And you don't have access to it early on. Onyx Chromen are a unit that are cheap, and you get access to them pretty early. So, the fact that they have the yin element is going to make it where you can early on build some very melee-heavy Cathay armies. I like that a lot. That's very cool. They did get some slight price increases, slight leadership and melee attack debuff in exchange for picking up 20% Fizz resist and magical attacks. So that's all very cool. Magical attacks in particular is really nice. Early, cheap magical attacks is going to be really good for Cathay. In the past, when I've played Cathay, I've had a little bit of trouble fighting demons. In particular, Tzeentch. Funnily enough, the ones that you're going to be dealing with most is Cathay. And adding magical attacks, cheap units with magical attacks, is going to make the demons a little bit easier to put up with in the early game. Jade Lion is now a construct. Now provides mastery of the elemental winds and doesn't have immune to psychology. Well, it makes sense it doesn't have immune to psychology now it has construct. So the upkeep cost is more than double. Why did they only have 120 upkeep? I don't remember them being that cheap. Good lord. But they now have greater hit HP, a little bit less leadership, a little bit less charge bonus, no physical damage resistance, good bit of missile damage resistance. They now have magical attacks. They don't light things on fire anymore. But mastery of the elemental winds. I'm confused. Didn't one of the two lions already provide mastery of the elemental winds? Anyways. Jet Lion. Remove, yep, same old stuff. Probably the same changes across the board. Not quite, They lost a little bit of missile damage resistance in exchange for picking up massive spell resistance. Okay. And, ooh, they now silence units. Okay, so that's going to be what you want Jet Lions to do if you aren't having them fill the defensive purpose, which, if memory serves, they were the more defensive of the two Lion units. So, the primary purpose of the Jet Lion is then going to be providing the Yin buff for Yang units, being a more defensive monster, and specifically being able to nullify enemy spellcasters. Good stuff. The Terracotta Sentinel is no longer unbreakable. That is a big change for Cathay. That is a big, big change, because the Terracotta Sentinel has always been stupid good. Really one of the very best monsters in the game. In large part because even it was big and tanky, but on top of all that, it was unbreakable. Which is pretty crazy. Now, 75 leadership is still nothing to sneeze at. It's still going to be immune to psychology, still going to be a big, tanky monster, so this thing is not going to take a lot of leadership debuffs. It's not going to be scared, it's going to take a while for it to take enough damage for it to get the leadership debuffs from significant health loss. So this thing's still going to be really tanky, but it's not going to be the unbreakable nonsense anymore. Zhengyu War Drum now provides attribute and does not provide spell mastery, and now provides harmony amplification, and now also gives plus 10 reload skill. It didn't have encourage before, really. Well, anyways, harmony amplification means that the Zhengyu War Drum is going to be able to offer the harmony bonus on a greater level, which is important because the dragon legendary lords, when they turn into dragons, they lose out on the harmony amplification. The Zhengyu War Drum is going to be able to cover for that, so that's nice. Taking a Zhengyu War Drum, yeah, I think that's going to work out quite well. I think buff units are underrated, though. I always like using the Corpse Guard as the vampire counts. There's one particular... In Warhammer 2, the Ovian team, Lost Factions, had the Halflings that they released. A Halfling army list. Fully unique race. And they're working on it for Warhammer 3 as we speak. It's not out yet. But nonetheless, it was a very, very cool army list. Because it was entirely focused on buffs. And their whole gimmick was that the regular Halfling units, statistically, were quite bad. And relatively overpriced. But if you took the buff units and put them behind your Halflings, they would make the Halflings really, really strong. And they're a fun army list because that was such a unique scheme. Because there are buff units and buffing units in a good couple of the armies, but nothing to that level. It was a lot of fun. For the Greenskins, Azag the Slaughterer's unique Mount Skullmuncher now has his armor pieces properly. I thought I heard that they lost those assets. They might have just replicated them. The Rogue Idol is now a little bit cheaper in exchange for the fact that he's no longer unbreakable. Okay, he's unbreakable. So I was wrong earlier. I thought I could still swear he has some kind of ability that makes it where when he takes damage, he'll do a little bit of self-damage in exchange for dropping rocks on anyone in his immediate vicinity. I'll look into that later. But nonetheless, yeah, that's all very cool. That's a small price change. Gonna make those units a little bit more reasonable to pack. In exchange for the fact that they no longer just don't have to worry about leadership. And they listed a dwarf change under the Greenskins. That's a little bit odd. High Elves, yeah, some minor changes to costs and missile damage resistance. Nothing significant. Bug fixed one of Khorne's skills. And for Kislev, Katarin has lost the ability Ice Shard in exchange for picking up the ability Guardian Call. What was Ice Shard? I don't even remember. Guardian Call is this where you get to summon the Frost Leopard, right? No, yeah, you get to summon the Frost Leopard and then it upgrades to where you can summon the Elemental Bear? Is that how it worked? We'll see. While Ice Shard, the ability has been picked up by the Ice Witch and the Frost Maiden, though only if they use the Lore of the Ice, not Lore of Tempest. Hag Witch has seen some nerfs. She is now a little bit less tanky, and she has less ammo. Honestly, they could probably stand to see a little bit more nerfs. The Hag Witches are hilarious. A rapidly moving artillery chariot is pretty strong. Ostankia has seen, some slight nerfs in the same fashion. And she no longer has ward save. Akshina Ambushers lost splash attack. Why do they have splash attacks? That's a regular infantry unit. I mean, I remember that the Akshina already saw one major change that made them much less OP. I was not aware they had splash attacks. They had armor-piercing melee, armor-piercing ranged, stalk, vanguard deploy. They were cheaper than Streltsy, And they had splash attacks. That's crazy. I never noticed that. Oh, why were they so strong? I'm so glad they've nerfed the hell out of that unit. And the crazy thing is, the Shadows of Change DLC has come with so many cool units, and is getting even more cool units in the next update. But why was it at launch that all these cool units, but the strongest unit they added was the Akshina, the one unit that, like, looked really boring? Whatever. That's funny. Okay, we've already seen the changes to the Incarnate Elemental Beast. Did pick up a new ability, Howl of the Great Beast. Curious, wonder what that means. Things in the woods are now a little bit more expensive in exchange for picking up a couple more entities. And armor, and they lose the ability to brace for charges. I didn't know they could brace for charges. That's funny. Ethereal things in the woods seem similar changes, as have the regiments of renown. Ah, okay, yeah, Spirits of Coldunia ability. So they now are more ethereal in exchange for there being less of them. Here we go. The Griffin Legion and Winged Lancers have gone up in cost. That's a surprise. They're already, I guess Winged Lancers, where do Winged Lancers compare in cost to? I guess they're already about the same cost as Empire Knights and Knights of the Realm for Bretonnia, so I guess this makes sense. Slight cost increase in exchange for that Glorious Charge ability. I'm not complaining. That Glorious Charge ability looks like plenty enough to make up for it. Some slight buffs to a good couple lords. The Boyar's seen some buffs. Ice Witches, yada yada. The Ice Witches can still ride the War Bear. If we're going to add that Frost Lizard, I would at least prefer for that to replace the War Bear, but whatever. Kossars now have picked up the ability Woodsman. Really? That's going to be a new use for him. I'm glad to see that. Really, you'd think a lot of Kislevite units would have Woodsman, though. Well, I guess the Kossars are already uniquely, like, kitted out in padded clothing that's probably not weighing them down too heavy, trying to run around over tree stumps and the like. Tree branches, roots, that's what I was trying to think of. That's the thing in a forest you need to be worried about tripping on and breaking your neck or landing on your sword or something. The Streltsy have seen a buff to melee attack, slight buff to defense, nothing too significant. Elemental Bear is no longer unbreakable. That's another big change. Though the Elemental Bear, to me, never mattered so much for Kislev as the Terracotta Sentinel mattered for Cathay. But then Kislev was never so intensely defensive of an army and interested in a long, grinding battle as Kislev was. Kislev was not interested in that as Cathay was. Excuse me. Kislev does not like to grind it out as much as Cathay does. Cathay sits up there with the dwarfs and for Nurgle in terms of quite enjoying that. Or sometimes Cathay could tend more towards Vampire Coast, where they wanted to shoot you to death before you actually got to them. And once you actually got to them, they'd be a little bit worried. The Little Grom now has a bonus versus large. Weird. 50 bonus versus large, that's huge. I don't even know what the melee stats on the Little Grom are now. I know they're okay. I've used Little Grom in melee before, and it's been solid. But 50 bonus versus large? If the melee attack on the Little Grom base, without any buffs, is already just like 20, isn't it? Maybe even a little bit larger. If you add a 50 bonus versus large to that melee attack, that means that the Little Grom now has 70 melee attack against large units, which is pretty crazy. Whew. Snow Leopard is now available at Tier 2. I believe that was Tier 3 before. Incarnate Elemental Beast is now available at Tier 5. Okay, I'm glad to see the Snow Leopard's available at a lower tier. That was a unit I never recruited. No, I recruited it sometimes. But I didn't like to recruit it a whole lot, partly because it just was at an inconvenient place, and partly because it sticks out to me as an odd unit. The Incarnate Elemental Beast at Tier 5 instead of, I assume it was at Tier 4, also makes sense. The Incarnate Elemental Beast being available at Tier 4 is a little bit odd. Lizard Man. Got an itch on my nose. The bridge of my nose is, between the nostrils is itching. I don't want to touch it because it'll look like I'm picking my nose, and that'd be nasty. Lizard Man, yeah. Krokgar now gains 1% weapon strength per character rank. as Saurus Old Bloods were cheekily ending up stronger than him at rank 50. Primal Instincts is now more consistently spread across the Lizardmen roster. Curious to see what that means. Fixed 2 of 10 of wands, sacrifices to Sotek. Woodsman has been added to the Pterodon Riders. That's funny. Huh. I guess for those oddball situations where the Pterodon Riders have decided to land and run around inside the woods themselves. Well, even then, Pterodons don't really land. If you've ever told a Pterodon unit to ground itself in the game, they don't actually land. They're not like War Eagles or whatever that actually lands properly, feet on the ground. They just float above the ground instead of up in the sky. But nonetheless, if you're having them land and run around in the woods, they can now be better at that. Weird. The aforementioned ability changes. Yep. All pretty nice changes for the Lizard Boys. And other than that, not a whole lot. Big changes. I'm curious, and when they say that Primal Instincts, there we go. Primal Instincts has now been put more uniformly across much of the roster. I wonder what that means. Because that's always been an ability for Sauruses and for Cold Ones. I wonder if they've given it to... They wouldn't give it to Skinks, would they? That'd be a little bit odd. To me, Skinks just don't have that battle savagery that the Sauruses do. They're supposed to be a bit more intellectual. Well, not intellectual, but a little bit more intelligent and thinking variety of lizardmen. Norska, Chaos Frost Dragon. Okay, the Frost Worm being added to Kislev. The old Frost Worm has remembered that it is, in fact, and has always been called a Chaos Frost Dragon. There never was a Frost Worm in the Norska roster. What do you mean? I'm laughing so hard I'm shaking the camera here. I need to stop that. It always was a dragon. It was always a Chaos Dragon. I always figured it was just called a worm because that's, Norska, that's just their word for dragon. And it looks very Scandinavian, W-Y-R-M, worm. But that's very funny to just say, yeah, there you go, it's the Chaos Frost Dragon, there you go. It's a little bit wordy. It's more than a little bit wordy. It's a good bit wordy. I'll probably in the future just call it the Frost Dragon. As a matter of fact, I'll probably forget that it's been renamed and just call it the Frost Worm. But that's not really that much of an issue. It is a little bit odd that none of the Lords or Heroes can take it as a mount, but then Norska is a little bit odd since 2 of the 3 hero types. Yeah, 2 of the 3 hero types they have can't take mounts at all, and Norska only has 1 Lord type. Man, I hope that the next DLC after Throne of Decay gives Norska some love, because Norska needs it. I popped the mic with the whistling there. Nurgle, just some bug fixes. Bug fixes around the shop. So nothing too big of surprises here. Yeah, nothing exciting. Tomb King. So, well, that's a little bit over the top. So, yeah, Cetra, Great King, the Imperishable, Camaricata, King of Kings, Opener of the Way, Wielder of the Divine Flame, Punisher of Nomads, the Great Unifier, Commander of the Golden Legion, Vanquisher of Vermin, Champion of the Death Arena, Mighty Lion of the Infinite Desert, Emperor of the Shifting Sands, Prince of Dust, Tyrant of Araby, Purger of the Greenskin Breathers, Killer of the False Gods Champions, Tyrant of the Gold Dunes, Golden Bone Lord, Avenger of the Dead, Carrion Master, Eternal Warden of Nehek's Lands, Breaker of Diaspans, and many more. There is a dude in the lore, what is his name? Nikaf? Cetra has a herald in the lore, in the tabletop, who is a legendary hero, whose whole gimmick was, aside from the fact that he was a solid fighter and obsessively a fanboy for Cetra, was the fact that he had memorized all of Cetra's titles, and it took him like a full day to list them all off. Anyways, yeah, Cetra also has the glorious charge ability when he's on his chariot. So unlike many other chariots, he doesn't want to plow right through the enemies and then keep going, and then turn around and come back. He wants to charge in and get stuck in for a little bit. So, unique, unlike other chariots, except the Snotling Pump Wagon with rollers. That's another chariot that likes to charge in and get stuck in for a little bit, rather than just charge through and then come through for another charge repeatedly until it needs to rest. Slightly decreased costs for the Tomb Prince. Nothing big. Zinch, yes, hope he doesn't. I don't expect the changeling to be nerfed very much. People pay for easy campaigns. Ikit Claw was the most popular campaign in Warhammer 2, besides like Karl Franz and maybe one other guy, maybe Tyrion. And that was for the reason of Ikit Claw is really easy to play. He's really OP. And Changeling, yeah, I don't see Changeling getting some campaign nerfs even though he needs them. It's a you literally can't lose. Okay. Akeled Hellbrand. Okay, just gonna be some mild stat changes here, nothing too remarkable. The Changeling himself is now more of a defensive unit and less of an offensive unit. That's nice to see. That makes sense for him as well. Zongors have seen their changes. So, yep, about the same thing for them. Like I said, they're going to be different for Tzeentch than they are for the Beastmen now with the way they're balanced. Cockatrice, slightly cheaper. Mutalith Vortex Beast. Good couple nerfs, not as offensively powerful, doesn't have as much HP, a little bit more melee defense. Lost out on a lot of charge bonus. The bonus versus large has been moved to bonus versus infantry. Kind of surprised that I don't remember it being an anti-large unit, but no, I do, because I remember finding it strange. Yeah, because it's supposed to be that it's always reaching out little tentacles and eating virtually everybody in its vicinity. I always thought that was weird then that it was dealing anti-large. At the time, I kind of reasoned away as like, well, the Charybdis is pretty similar in terms of loads of little heads reaching down and eating people. And the Charybdis is anti-large too. Though the Charybdis, they've offered some explanation down the years in the lore why the Charybdis would be a better anti-large creature, since the whole thing is that each of the mouths are like biting chunks out of the monster they're fighting or whatever. I don't remember. They offered a explanation, I just don't remember it. Yeah, other than that, not some huge changes. Strider for a bunch of units that are already flying anyways, that's kind of funny. When you think about it, flying units should probably have Strider to begin with. But nonetheless, the Exalted Flamer of Tzeentch has seen some buffs. It now is more accurate at a longer range. It has a bit more leadership. It does a bit less damage with the explosions. Oh, what? Okay, the Exalted Flamer shots now create vortexes instead of exploding. Good to know. Okay, and they made the same change for the Burning Chariots of Tzeentch. That makes sense. That's to separate the Burning Chariots of Tzeentch from the Changebringers. The Changebringers are going to be more consistent, just flamethrowers that shoot flames. That's it, end of story. The Burning Chariot of Tzeentch and the Exalted Flamer of Tzeentch are going to be a bit crazier with making baby vortexes. Good to know. That is cool. Okay, Vampire Coast. The Fleet Admiral with a pole arm, not a polearm, now has charge reflection and charge defense versus large. He didn't have that before? Weird. I guess it goes to show how little I play Vampire Coast, I suppose. Noctilus on the Necrofex Colossus now provides Encourage. Yeah, nothing too crazy. Doesn't look like anything too crazy for vampire counts either. Warriors of Chaos. We got some changes here. Bellicor now has minus 25% upkeep for all demons. Warriors of Chaos now gain souls from raising Chaos Dwarf settlements. So, yeah, I remember that being an issue when the Chaos Dwarfs came out. It's weird that it took them that long to fix that. Chaos Lord of Khorne's a little bit cheaper, but not some big changes here. Yeah, some bug fixes. Yada yada. Wood Elves, some Wood Elf faction leaders were changed in order to have the maximum variety of voice actors. This resulted in Torgovan losing Dave as its faction leader, which has now been restored. I kind of wondered if losing Dave as the faction leader had something to do with Dave being tied into the Sister of Twilight's mechanics. But, yeah, I guess it was just to make sure that there was voice actor variety. Well, that's going on for the Wood Elves, but then you look at the Empire, and there's about a dozen Empire factions, all of which are led by General of the Empire going, what? Only Sigmar's god Ulrich can judge this. And, yeah, nothing too exciting. Yeah, there you go. Athaloran Forest health will no longer naturally decline after performing the Ritual of Rebirth. Cool. Okay, unit ability changes. Let's see. A lot of existing abilities that cause Rampage are going to decrease in duration to account for the increased reliability. Makes sense. Also reduce the duration of some abilities that grants a bonus in exchange for rampaging, as losing control of your unit for too long was a bit too uninteractive. Yeah, Gaze the Cane lasts over a full minute. That's a good point. So, Slaanesh army-wide abilities, power level versus accessibility of each tier. Right, because Slaanesh does have a lot of stuff that causes Rampage. And Slaanesh does not need a buff right now. If memory serves, Slaanesh is considered by the competitive multiplayer base to be the best faction in the game. I don't know, I haven't been paying attention to the competitive side of Total War Warhammer for a couple months. I've kind of tuned out of a lot of YouTubers on Total War Warhammer. I just thought that a lot of them, after Shadows of Change, were getting too focused on accentuating the negative, which it's YouTube. YouTube rewards you for accentuating the negative. It's more profitable, so you got to get that cash, I suppose. But either which way, last I remember, Slaanesh was the strongest in competitive multiplayer. And before them, vampire counts were the top. Vampire counts are probably still pretty high up there. They're just not quite that high up. Anyways, which it makes sense. The vampire counts and Slaanesh both have access to some pretty powerful, fast-moving units that reward heavy micromanagement. Okay, they have changed ability placements in the skills and techs and campaign. I don't remember. Okay, Fascination. Are these the army abilities? I do not remember what the army abilities are called for Slaanesh. I remember using them. I don't remember what they're called. I don't remember barely any spell names in this game. It's never been something I've been great at. But, yeah. Fascination has been changed. They have apparently nerfed whatever it does, which is provides direct damage for a period of time. Yeah, it rampages and causes direct damage. Okay, nice. High damage to elites, like all direct damage spells. Narcissism is getting a buff. Sweet Sorrow is getting a buff. Okay, yeah. So these, yeah, they've moved. It looks to me like they've moved the army abilities. The rampage and damage is now at tier 3. The unit buff is now at tier 1. Makes sense you want to get a unit buff at tier 1 for Slaanesh. While for character abilities that provide rampage, the Curse of Dyath, was that? Curse of Dyath, that's one of the Tomb King curses that kicks in whenever they get to be low health, right? Something like that. But yeah, rampage effect changes, just generally lowering the duration. And a lot of just small changes to a lot of abilities. I don't recognize a lot of the names of these abilities, sadly. So I can't speak to what changes have been made. Glare of Insanity is a quest ability. The Glare of Insanity is used by the giant boss Hydra you face during the Beast of Rama monster hunt, which is for Rakarth, I think? Yeah. Originally, this ability cycled on and off during the duration of the battle, causing your entire army to occasionally rampage up to twice per unit. But in the new implementation, this resulted in a truly demented battle, where your entire army was near permanently uncontrollable. Good for a laugh, but not very playable. I would like to see the devs release the footage of what that looked like. Now triggers just once at the start of the battle, giving you a chance to recover once your armies have slammed together in the initial carnage. I see. Spell changes. These ones, I'll know at least a few of these. I see, more active time, but a lot of these I assume are not huge changes. I wouldn't expect massive spell changes. Oh, the Pavane of Slaanesh now costs a bit more Winds of Magic because it provides Rampage. That does... Oh, it removed Rampage. And instead drains Fatigue. Ooh. I like that. That was a spell I didn't use very much before. There's not a lot of situations where I tend to use Rampage, especially when you're playing Slaanesh. Rampage is a really powerful ability for the placement of enemy units, but as Slaanesh, your units are so fast, you don't really have to concern yourself too much with the placement of the enemies, in my experience. But I'm not a huge Slaanesh player. But Fatigue Drain is really nice. That's going to be... If it's 2% Fatigue Drain per second, and it's active for 17 seconds... That's going to be a fatigue drain of 34%. which is a lot. And if it's going to be 34 seconds, 2 per second, then it's going to be 68% fatigue drain, which is an absurd amount of fatigue drain. So you can effectively just make, like, that's beyond a debuff being put on by a usual spell. It'd be one thing if it's just a regular spell that for, 17 seconds puts on, minus 12 melee attack, minus 12 melee defense. That makes it, a little bit weaker for that stint of time. But fatigue drain, unless the enemy unit has something that will restore their fatigue, or that unit just gets to sit by itself for a while and restore stamina, which the AI is never going to do that. The AI always makes sure to have their units attacking somebody. The AI hates having units sit idle. That is effectively a permanent debuff. Because the AI is not going, odds are the AI is not going to recover that unit's fatigue. So that, or vigor, or whatever you want to call it. Stamina, I always go with stamina because that's what most games say, but the game, Total War Warhammer never calls it stamina, it's always fatigue or vigor. But either way, that's a big change. Yeah, that's going to be a serious debuff to whatever unit you decide to hit that with. Very nice. Thorn's Aura now provides damage reflection to friendly units instead of debuffing enemies. Don't remember what spell that was. That's not a Lore of Life spell, right? Because Lore of Life already had a thorny shield spell that provided damage reflect. I don't know what other spell it was that did that then. Yeah, changes across the board to units to rampage spells. Primal Instincts now only provides 5 melee attack instead of 10. That's not a surprise. Primal Instincts was a pretty big buff for basically using the unit the regular way you're always going to use it. Nagao grenades, yeah, nothing too big here. And, Berserk, okay, the Berserk Rampage, okay, they've just changed the timing of the stages. That makes sense. Graphics changes, let's see. Would not expect anything too big here. There are, of course, loads of little graphics bugs. There's always going to be loads of little graphics bugs with Total War Warhammer. If you stop and think about the fact that there are kind of a really, or no, not really. There are 15 playable races in Warhammer 2. I can always remember that very cleanly. Warhammer 3 kind of added 8, but I don't really count the Demons of Chaos under Daniel. So really added, did they add Kislev Cathay, Monogods, Ogres, Chaos Dwarfs. Yeah, 8 playable races, effectively, to the game. And 8 plus 15, if my math is right, which I hope it is this time. It's 23. Basic kindergarten math, folks. There you go. 23 races in the game, each of which has anywhere between 20 and 50 units. Has some of them coming closer to 50, looking at you, Skaven. You consider all those units, and lords, and heroes, and legendary lords, and legendary heroes, and the variety of situations they can be in, and the variety of maps, many of which have a different variety of climates. There's gonna be graphics bugs. It's just not humanly possible for us to squash them all. There's gonna be a lot of them. So I tend to roll right over the graphic bugs issues part of it. Sometimes I see a graphics bug fixed that I recognized in-game, but I often see ones that I never even noticed. So, yeah, I don't see anything particularly noteworthy here. Some audio changes. And Warhammer 1 Chaos Campaign battle screen music has been re-implemented. Okay, cool. I like to see more music. UI, don't expect some big changes here. Just some bug fixes. Yeah, adjusted some event text, better match rewards, yada yada. Yeah, so nothing in particular. So, here we go. Looking forward to the future. I would not anticipate a big stuff here, but they're excited to get the update into our hands. Can't wait for us to jump in and try it out tomorrow. As for what's on the horizon, there we go. We've got our sights set on Throne of Decay. with new recruits for Nurgle, the Empire, and the Dwarfs with open arms. So, yeah, this is the update. So, the balance changes were actually more than I anticipated. I was kind of expecting to just see some bug fixes. I'm glad to see that they hit some big ones that have been problems with the game for quite a while. That bloom thing was, ooh, a menace. And the squares on the corruption of graphic effects on the map, certainly annoying. I am glad to see it fixed. I honestly didn't think it would get fixed. It seemed like it would be a problem, especially because campaign map, messing about with the campaign map seems like a menace. The balance changes, though, were a lot more than I anticipated. The rampage changes, it is nice to see the rampage system be made more consistent, more easily observable how it works, less reliant on RNG. It did occur to me while I was talking about Terror, though, they're going to the trouble with Rampage of making it where it's much clearer how Rampage works. For new players looking at the tooltips for the various bits of UI and abilities, it's always been a bit unclear how does Rampage work. And now it's clarified. And it did occur to me that if memory serves, the only reason I know how the Terror system works is because I've watched YouTube videos dissecting how the Terror system works mechanically. But I believe the in-game tooltip still says something very vague and ambiguous, like, makes units more likely to rout. Something like that. So, that's one thing. I don't think the Terror system needs any changes. I like it as it is. But they could probably change the tooltip on that to make it a little clearer. Other than that, a lot of the balance changes, those new abilities. I gotta go back up to those new abilities. I'll hit Throne of Decay. I'll talk about Throne of Decay in a second, because I do want to hit that. But the ability changes. Let's see. Yeah. Skink and Croxagore, the Spawnkin. That is a very cool, lore, flavorful thing right there. I'm big on lore flavor. I think that a big part of the virtue of the Total War Warhammer world is its ability to take the Warhammer Fantasy universe and fully realize it in a way that very few, little to no video games have ever been able to pull off, fully realizing any fictional universe. And so I'm big on the lore stuff, the flavor stuff, and so this plays into that a lot, as well as encouraging more creative and unique army builds. So I like that a lot. Predatory Fighter changed. It's flavorful. It's a little bit odd. It's going to require a little bit of a change to the way I play the Lizardmen when I'm using Sauruses. But I won't complain, because it is a neat change. Sacred Duty and Eternal Duty. Very nice. Flavorful stuff for the Temple Guard. Temple Guard already had Guardian, I believe. Did they? I don't remember, because Guardian is a rarer ability than one would think. But nonetheless, they encourage you to use the Temple Guard more as they're supposed to be used on the tabletop, which is take a unit of Temple Guard to guard your Slan, and no more than that. So, I'm glad to see that there's more encouragement to use the Temple Guard as they should be in the lore and as they were on the tabletop. Solar Engine, I'm always interested in seeing abilities that affect the Vigor system. The Elemental and Construct changes, all very nice. Gonna be some big changes to these units. Gonna be a bit less reliance on the unbreakableness of the Terracotta Sentinel, the Rogue Idol, and the Incarnate Elemental of Beasts, and the Elemental Bear. Glorious Charge is going to be neat changes to the Weak Winged Lancers. They'll encourage you to use them in a different way than other Cycle Charge Heavy Cavalry. And the Bastiladon not being able to be flanked. Like I said, that's going to be a nice change for it. So, that's all very cool stuff. I love to see a lot of these abilities, and I'd love to see more of them thrown around on a lot of the older armies. It can make units that are not terribly interesting right now more interesting once they are added, once these abilities come in. Now, Spawnkin specifically makes me think of another unit, another couple of units that I would like to see a similar change occur to. The Empire on the tabletop had a rule system for some units were considered like the main core units. Halberdiers, good couple others. Oh, what was it? I forget what the system was called. But there were units in the Empire Army list that were considered core units, like Halberdiers, and maybe like handgunners. And then there were units that were supposed to be considered attached supporting units, which could then be a joint package you'd get with the Halberdiers. Swordsmen were considered a support unit. Crossbowmen were considered a support unit. So the Empire army list on tabletop encouraged you to have a core of your army around the more unique Imperial units. Halberdiers, handgunners, not just your generic sword and board or spearman dudes. And I really like that. And to me, I think the Empire army list in Total War Warhammer can feel kind of boring at a lot of times because there is that encouragement in the early game. When I'm on the first couple turns of the Empire campaign, I tend to take more Free Company and Pistoliers than most people do, and less swordsmen and spearmen and archers, because at the end of the day, using the most generic Total War army list possible does not interest me. And for the first couple turns of the Empire, that's all you get. And Free Company and Pistoliers are the rare exceptions. Once you get to the point of Halberdiers, I throw in more Halberdiers, partly because it's unique. It's more unique to have an army list more comprised of Halberdiers. Partly because it's thematic, because it is established in the lore that the Empire's favorite melee weapon is supposed to be the halberd, and that the halberdier is the most common infantry unit that the Empire likes to deploy. And I would like to see more gameplay rewards for playing that thematic playstyle, and make it where, for instance, halberdiers provide buffs to swordsmen, swordsmen provide buffs to halberdiers, handgunners provide buffs to archers or crossbowmen, crossbowmen provide more buffs to handgunners. Crossbowman is another one. The crossbowman unit is another one that sticks out to me, especially before the Hunter and the Beast update, when they added archers, and the crossbowmen were the cheapest ranged support unit you could get. And it stuck out to me that then the crossbowman was a unit that you'd see for the Empire deployed en masse. And it stuck out to me because in the lore, the crossbowmen are supposed to be a bit of a rarer unit that the Empire doesn't make as much use out of. That generally speaking, what crossbowmen there are in the Empire are mostly hired mercenaries from Tylea or Astalia. It always seemed strange to me then that they were the cheapest missile unit you could get. And when they had the Hunter and the Beast DLC, that meant that if you bought the DLC, you could get archers, and that would be your go-to cheap missile unit. And if you want something a bit more snazzy, you're more likely to go for handgunners than crossbowmen. So I was glad that that made it. The Empire's a little bit less reliant on crossbowmen. But making the crossbowmen a side contingent instead of the main core of the army under that buff rules, I'd quite like as well. And it would encourage you to use more diversity in your Empire armies. Even for me, I tend to go more towards, once I get access to them, lots of halberdiers and handgunners. I tend not to use the swordsmen or spearmen so much. And if they got buffs from being in the proximity of the halberdiers, that would encourage me to mix it up a little bit more. Now, naturally, these would be changes I'm proposing here that a lot of people wouldn't even use. A lot of people just play Empire and they just spam steam tanks. More power to them. But for those of you who want to play the way I play, or even not necessarily building thematic armies, but trying to play to win specifically, but also not cheesing, it'd be nice for them as well. So, and Throne of Decay, the Empire is going to be one of the 3 races that get looked at in Throne of Decay. So if there would be a time to do it, it's going to be now. Well, not now, but summertime. 2 or 3 months, whenever Throne of Decay comes around. Now, Throne of Decay, what do I want from Throne of Decay? I think I've already addressed what units I'm kind of expecting here. Nurgle, I'm expecting Rot Knights, Plague Toad, Bile Trolls, plus whoever else. Probably some Plague Bulls or something, some Nurgle-marked Beastmen, which is going to be nice for the Beastmen as well. It's not just going to be an addition for Nurgle, which then again, pretty well all of the units, every unit Nurgle gets will probably be going to other races as well, because the Warriors of Chaos will probably also get themselves access to the Bile Trolls, the Rot Knights, and the Plague Toads. Especially because I think they had access to them on tabletop after the Tamarcon campaign released. The Empire, I expect Knights of the White Wolf, Knights Panther, Celestial Hurricanum, probably the Marienburg steamship, land ship. I don't want them to get the land ship. Like I said, modders have already done a very good job with the land ship. I'd rather Creative Assembly's resources go towards something else. And on top of that, I prefer that the Empire not have access to what to me is a very distinctly Marienburg unit. Especially because, again, modders have done an excellent job making Marienburg their own fully fleshed out race. So, I'd rather not see the land ship. We're probably going to see the land ship. It's a pretty commonly requested unit. There are a lot of Total War players that don't use mods. They're crazy people and they're cutting themselves out of a lot of fun and a good time. But nonetheless, there are a lot of Total War players who don't use mods. And for those guys, they've been asking for the land ship for quite some time. And they're not going to download the mod, so this is the only way they're going to get it. and it would probably sell a DLC. So I expect the land ship. I'll be pleasantly surprised if we don't get it, which is a funny thing to say, I know. But if you want the land ship that badly and you're watching this video, go download the Marienburg mod. It's on the Steam Workshop. If you look up Marienburg, it's probably the top rated Marienburg mod. And yeah, go download that. It's a very cool mod. And Mixu's Unlocker, if you don't have that already, because you need that to use it. But Mixu's Unlocker is used for virtually every mod. Beyond the Knights, the Celestial Huracan, the land ship, there would be a 5th unit. We know that. I don't know what it's going to be. That's going to be a bit of a surprise. Oh yeah, I guess Lords and Heroes. Nurgle, we're going to be looking at a Lord of Nurgle and a Sorcerer of Nurgle for your hero. There you go. Legendary characters, I don't even know. Nurgle's already come pretty close to running out of characters. Empire, you're going to see a Knight Master Lord and an Engineer hero, almost certainly. Dwarfs, I expect a Slayer Lord and a Slayer hero. They could technically do an Engineer Lord, but I wouldn't expect it, especially because that was never part of the main Dwarfs army list. It was only part of one little side army list back in 6th edition. For their units, the Dwarfs are, no matter what, going to be entirely new stuff. They're not like Nurgle or the Empire, where they've got big stuff from the tabletop that's still missing. You know, the Empire has several points on their army list. They had the Celestial Huracan on 8th edition. They don't have it in Total War right now. They had, before the 8th edition, they had the Knights Panther and the Knights of the White Wolf, but they don't have it on Total War right now. Nurgle, similarly, there's the Tamarcon stuff. But for the Dwarfs, they've got, I think, everything they had on the tabletop, except for the Lord and Hero versions of the Slayer. The Dragon Slayer and the Demon Slayer. There's, I think I said this before in a previous blog, which I'm already repeating myself a bunch here, but I guess I'm summarizing. There's the Doomseekers from the Slayer King army list, the Carrick-Cadrin army list that came with Storm of Chaos. But good lord, that one would be difficult to animate. Because it is effectively, you ever see the whirling loons that the Night Goblins can get, which are Night Goblins swinging around big boulders on chains, and they just spin in place, because that's the simplest way to animate that. The Doomseekers are Slayers who, rather than going into battle with 2 axes, they have axe heads joined to chains, and they're holding on to the other end of the chain, and just kind of whirling through the air, going nuts with the axe heads on chains. And that'd be really difficult to animate. Khorne has a similar unit they introduced in the End Times. I don't remember it. It's Skull Reaper, Head Taker, one of Khorne's usual creative names. And I wouldn't expect that one, partly because the End Time stuff Total War Crave simply doesn't seem to want to touch, and understandably. But also because, good lord, could you imagine animating that? The Dwarfs, when you get into the stuff that's more in the lore, but never really on the tabletop army lists, you do get into the Thunder Barge, which I think is pretty well a guarantee. It's a big dwarf unit that everybody's wanted for forever, and it technically already exists in a certain form in the game right now as we speak. You can see one docked at the top of Kara's Akarak, but you can't recruit any. And that would be a big, unique, cool, flying artillery piece that would provide loads of fire support. As flying units go, it would be big and slow and not particularly tough. So you would have to build unique tactics around it, especially if the enemy has a lot of flying units themselves. But it'd be very cool, a very unique unit that would continue the Dwarfs having a unique identity for flying units. Other than that, I think a lot of people are anticipating the Rune Guardians and the Rune Golems, big animated statues. Those are very cool. I do think they detract from the Dwarf army list identity, because the Dwarfs don't really have monsters. That's part of their whole gimmick, and it would give the Dwarfs a monster unit. But as long as the Dwarfs don't get cavalry, I guess the faction identity hasn't been that diluted. Other than that, though, that's still, even if we were to say Doomseekers, Thunderbarge, which Doomseekers I'm virtually going to guarantee aren't happening, Doomseekers, Thunderbarge, Rune Guardian, Rune Golem, that still leaves a 5th unit. It's weird. Maybe Slayer Pirates. Who knows? Beyond just Lord and Hero and Unit additions, though, the big thing is going to be campaign changes. These are all 3 factions that I'd say could really do with some changes. Now, the Empire received one of... For those who are not there for Warhammer 2, they recognized that the Warhammer 1 races did not quite match up to the Warhammer 2 races for how unique their campaign mechanics were. The Dwarfs were the first to get an update to try and bring them up to the Warhammer 2 standard, And the Creative Assembly opinion was that the dwarfs were already really had a unique campaign in Warhammer 1, so the only addition they got was the rune smithy, which, rune crafting, which was, of course, a largely just reusing the mechanic of the mortuary cult from the Tomb Kings. Come Warhammer 3, the dwarves had fallen behind somewhat, but near the end of Warhammer 2, they brought in another big update for the dwarfs. They made it so that the Book of Grudges could now buff you as well as nerf you in some ways whenever you had a lot of grudges. That was a big, nice update. They overhauled the way the units were tiered so that there were no longer any tier 5 units. Even the flame cannon was available at tier 4, which was weird, but nonetheless was a noteworthy buff. It meant dwarfs got access to a lot of cool units earlier than they were able to before. I anticipate that Throne of Decay is going to give them tier 5 units now, with the Thunder Barge and the Rune Guardian almost certainly being those two tier 5 units. Excuse me. The dwarfs, realistically, I think, are in a largely fine space. Maybe they could do a little bit more tuning in some places. But, realistically speaking, I think the dwarfs are in a good place. Could maybe, if I were to change one thing, I'd maybe give them a bigger buff for when they retake lost dwarf holds. But I think they're in a good place. The Empire, comparatively, in Warhammer 2, they updated the Empire after the dwarfs because the Empire needed a lot of work. The Empire had effectively no unique campaign mechanics. They had the offices mechanic, which is still around in Warhammer 3, but now only the Vampire Coast and the Wood Elves have access to it. It's the little pyramid of offices you can give to differing lords, which just provides little buffs. It's pretty well the same as if they had a skill in the skill tree, except only one of your lords in your faction gets access to it. Not really that big. And so they replaced that with the Elector County system and the Imperial Politics systems, both of which I think are quite cool and added to the Empire a major element that was necessary and a major part of the Empire's faction identity in the lore, which is the intense internal politics. As well as, of course, uniting the counties under the Emperor. But I think that the Empire has started to fall behind yet again. I don't know if they necessarily should get another big mechanic. I'd love to see one, naturally. I'd love to see some kind of mechanic for, like, the internal religious divisions between, let's say, Sigmar and Ulrich. Or something for the Colleges of Magic. But on some level, they just need some tweaks to make some of the stuff more interesting. Not necessarily buffs. Well, Carl Franz could probably use some buffs so he could deal with the sheer quantity of insanity he has to deal with now that he didn't have to deal with in Warhammer 2. But just some tweaks. One that sticks out to me, that has stuck out to me for a long time. The Empire is one of the most technologically advanced factions in the setting. They're a little bit behind the Skaven and the Dwarfs. Quite a ways behind the Chaos Dwarfs, but everyone is. But the Empire is supposed to be technologically, about level with Cathay. Ahead of Kislev a little bit. But Kislev has the bigger tech tree, if memory serves. Cathay has a much bigger tech tree. The Ogre Kingdoms have a massive tech tree compared to the Empire. So it doesn't lend to the narrative that the Empire is one of the more technologically advanced nations in the setting. The Empire has kind of a little crappy tech tree. So I'd like to see maybe some changes to it. Maybe they could spread out some of the buffs, add some nicer buffs in some parts. I don't know. I'm always hesitant to add on to say that anything needs buffed. Creative Assembly has a tendency to go a bit over the top when they buff things. And there are a lot of games where I wouldn't complain about that, but Total Warhammer, it has been a punch in the neck sometimes. Looking at you, Changeling. Some of the stuff is just a little bit too strong. But either way. And Nurgle. So Nurgle doesn't need any new mechanics. Nurgle does not need any new mechanics. Mechanically, they got enough depth. They got a lot of cool stuff going on. The problem with Nurgle is it's just not quite satisfying enough. The Plague mechanic feels a bit too reliant on RNG. Some of the stuff feels a bit inconsistent. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I remember when there was the build up to Warhammer 3, they said that Nurgle armies could spread diseases by attacking enemy armies or sieging settlements. I've not seen that happen yet. I've not yet spread a plague by attacking somebody. Maybe I'm doing it wrong. I assume I'm doing it wrong. But it's not super clear. And Nurgle could do with a little bit of a buff around, like, it should be noted, Nurgle has a way that he can be played very, very well. There are some plagues that are very, very good. That can make you a lot of money. That can do some significant debuffs. But Nurgle especially feels like he has to just, or, well, it isn't even Nurgle so much as it is specifically Kugath, which I've not played Festus. Festus is the one out of the Champions of Chaos I've never given a shot to. But Kugath he feels like he needs to just sit there in his home province for the first good couple dozen turns, because he doesn't really have the military might to take on whatever else is in his vicinity and hold an empire. He wants to wait until he gets the technologies research to increase the plague spread chance. And relying on RNG so much feels pretty bad, when there are a lot of races in the game who can get a lot more done without having to worry about RNG. Total War Warhammer 1 back in the day was a lot more RNG reliant. But as the series has gone on, they have cut down the RNG notably quite a bit. So there are a few things in campaign that are still very RNG reliant, but it's little odd things like hero action success chance. That still sticks out as an oddly RNG reliant mechanic. And it being such a crapshoot can feel very unsatisfying sometimes. Or no, most of the time. Even when it succeeds. So it sticks out to me that Nurgle, especially out of the 4 mana gods, where comparatively Tzeentch and Slaanesh and Khorne can get such guaranteed results. Khorne technically has to rely on RNG for its capability to settle in places, but the RNG odds are so good that it doesn't really feel random. It's pretty easy to game the odds in such a way that's not really random. But Tzeentch and Slaanesh in particular can guarantee so many things are going to happen. Slaanesh can rig the diplomacy game so effectively, and the cult game so effectively. Tzeentch can control the winds of magic so effectively, which was a randomized system for everybody but Tzeentch. And Tzeentch can do all that. He can mess with people's, he can trade settlements and all that. But Nurgle, what Nurgle really wants to do is spreading diseases. His equivalent to Changing of the Ways, or Slaanesh's Seduction, or Khorne's burning everything to the ground. For all of them, it's so concrete. For Nurgle, it's really just a roll of the dice. And especially in the early game, the dice are so often not in your favor. So Nurgle, I think, needs some changes to the way the plague system works. More specifically, I think they need to change some changes to the way the plague spreading system works. Now, I don't know what the cure is. I generally believe that in a lot of cases, there's an old wisdom. I forget who said it. There was a game developer who once said that players can figure out the problems, but their proposed solutions are near always awful, if not worse than the problem itself. I generally think that's true. And I try to be self-aware about these things. I'm not proposing any solutions. Honestly, off the top of my head, I can't come up with an immediate solution. But I perceive a problem here. I'm curious to see what is done about it. I think there will definitely be something done about it. Nurgle, still very much out of the 4 mana god factions, feels like the one who has the hardest time. But, yeah, there you go. That's me rambling on long enough. This was a pretty hefty patch notes. A lot of stuff for me to talk about. As you can tell by the fact that this is now rocking a solid hour and 43 minutes. But, nonetheless, very curious to see the direction things are going. Definitely going to pop in the game and play tomorrow. Won't record it, as I have a dentist appointment, and who knows if I can even speak tomorrow. I may be getting caps put in and things like that. Which, 25 years of life, no dental issues. All of a sudden, 2 massive cavities. Whew. Anyways, I'll be dealing with that tomorrow and not recording, but nonetheless, I definitely intend to record something soon-ish. As soon as both time and health can afford me. And I will see you folks then. There we go. Later.